Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's so good to be in virtual space with you, and I'm happy we can gather still, though we are in the midst of an ongoing pandemic that continues to shake us to our cores. I want to acknowledge that I'm zooming in from Lenape, I'm also a descendant of free, then enslaved, and now justice seeking Africans. And as such, the term Sankofa resonates deeply with me. The Akan tribe in Ghana says it is not taboo to fetch what is at risk of being left behind. And this serves as a reminder that on our quest to move forward, we do so with critical examination and an uncovering of truth so that no one gets left behind. The striking challenges of our time, of course, this ongoing health crisis, poverty, climate change, discrimination, just to name a few, are so complex. And no matter how you're tackling them, whether from a personal level or local, national, or global scale. And this session offers one proposed idea for how we can approach these issues to the fullest extent that is necessary to make forward progress. The session is called Dare to Impact, and it's a conversation on collecting and combining cross-sector forces to achieve greater impact. I am Kristal Pacific, and as a Sphinx leader, I am proud to moderate this session, which comes at the momentous occasion of the organization's 25th anniversary. And the theme of SphinxConnect this year is forging alliances. So, with this session, we aim to discuss how we can use alliances of individuals, nonprofit organizations, government, philanthropic, business sector organizations for the purpose of impact. Throughout the conversation, we'll hope to share some examples of how some organizations have taken the opportunity to forge cross-sector alliances, discuss some of the impact we have seen, and illustrate not just the importance of active, authentic partnerships, but also how to help one another stay accountable. I am pleased to introduce my esteemed panelists that will join us in tackling this juicy topic. First, we have Jennifer Acree, a program officer at the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. Melanca Clark is the chief executive officer at the Hudson-Webber Foundation. And Lane Harwell is the program officer for creativity and free expression at the Ford Foundation. And while those of us on screen will help to get this conversation started, I encourage you in the audience, whoever's listening, to share your questions as we're going along. To do so, please navigate to the Q&A button tab under the Ballroom tab located on the right side of your screen. And there you can post your questions, and we'll leave some time near the end to get it to some of them as we can. So let's get started. Panelists, I want to hear from each of you. So you're all coming to this discussion with some experience, whether leading or doing cross-sector work. Tell us a bit about the lens you're bringing to this conversation. I named your position and institution at the top, but tell us a bit more about how your role contributes to this topic. Also, if you're doing this work by other affiliations that you'd like to talk about, feel free to share that as well. I will start with Lane.
Thanks, Kristal, and thanks to Sphinx and all of my colleagues on the panel for organizing the session, and thanks to you all who are joining. I'm Lane Herwell. My pronouns are they and he. I'm zooming in from Lenape land as well. I'm a white queer femme person wearing all black today, black aviators. I have sort of blonde hair swooped to the side. As Kristal mentioned, I bring a funder hat today. I also bring a dancer artist hat. an educator hat, an MBA, entrepreneur, manager hat, policy wonk hat, art service organization hat. And I think to this question of, and to the definition of cross-sector forces, it's important for me to note here that I'm not representing an arts funder. I'm representing a foundation whose North Star is tackling inequality, from entrenched cultural narratives to access to government. Funding the arts is part of that work. And the unit I'm in, Creativity and Free Expression, includes journalism, documentary film, and the arts. We're all strategically focused on advancing underrepresented voices and stories that have not yet been heard. Shall I pass it to someone else?
Yeah, let's hear from Melinka.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. You asked about the lens. So I will say, as you mentioned, I lead the Hudson-Webber Foundation, which is an independent foundation in Detroit, which has a long and enduring mission of improving the quality of life in the city of Detroit. And we invest in a number of focus areas, including arts and culture. I want to acknowledge that. It's a very important part of the work that we support. And we're also a proud funder of the Sphinx organization. So really glad to be here, and congratulations to the organization on the 20 years. I think that I have been asked here to speak from another hat that I wear, which is the chair of the Michigan Justice Fund. And that is a collaborative that we started, a multi-funder collaborative to advance equitable justice policy in the state. And I came to my position in philanthropy. I'm a lawyer by training, justice policy background. So may not surprise some, it's my passion. But I'd say that as we have advanced the work of the fund, we've come in with a thesis about how you do something like that. And it involves a couple of key pieces to sort of what we'd want to see in our state: strong data infrastructure, high-functioning law and policy organizations, member-driven base-building organizations, broad coalitions of diverse allies and constituents, effective messaging and movement building that mobilizes systemic response to these issues. So that is one of the lenses, because of that sort of broad view of the many different components, elements in our society that actually advance change. I sort of bring that perspective on cross-sector investment and learning. Awesome. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Melinka. Jennifer.
Hi, everybody. I want to echo my thanks, as Lane had said, to Sphinx and to Kristal and my fellow panelists. Looking forward to this conversation. As Kristal had stated, I am a program officer with the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. I specifically am on our Flint grant-making team. We also fund in civil society, environment, and education. So I definitely bring that place-based philanthropy lens. Flint is the only place where we specifically have an arts grant-making objective, and so that's a lot of the work that I do. But I also, I myself am a spoken word artist and have been engaged in the arts individually. But before joining the foundation, I ran a capacity building program in the Flint community. And so I can never get away from that lens in anything that I am doing. In fact, the first arts organization I worked with was a bunch of friends who started the first nonprofit, or an arts nonprofit. And I don't think what I was doing to help them, they would have called capacity building. I was really making them follow too many rules and trying to structure the organization in a way that they were very much trying not to structure. So, but certainly have learned over the last 20 years about that. And then I also lead some of our, and along with the rest of my Flint team, some work around participatory grant making, which was not, it was focused on neighborhoods in this last round. But I bring that perspective as well in terms of the way in which we've engaged our community in different ways most recently.
Great. Yeah, I should mention too that I am a program officer for the cultural investments team at the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone Development Corporation. And our team is also very much engaged in helping and doing capacity building work in Upper Manhattan communities, Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood. So we certainly share that, Jennifer. So with this, a lot of us are coming from this philanthropic lens. That's one that we certainly share here. And the philanthropic sector is unique in its efforts to engage in cross-collaborative work. We often provide support to institutions and other individuals who are doing the work on the ground. And each of our institutions, as you've already outlined, has specific issues you're grappling with through your work. So can you tell us a specific example about how you've engaged in cross-sector work to address some specific challenge? Maybe I'll start with Jennifer, if you want to jump in, especially because you're doing specific work in Flint.
Yeah, I actually struggled with what example to hone in on when we first met and started planning this session, and thought, oh goodness, what am I going to draw on? And then the list became really long. And I think one example that relates to, some of what I talked about in terms of our participatory grant making is one of the, well, let me start by saying for me, cross sector is, both about the nonprofit, philanthropic, business, and public sector working together for larger goals within our community. But I also, because of some of the grant making that I do, am also really always thinking about across the nonprofit sector, how arts and culture organizations are engaging more broadly in the community and not staying within their own silos within the sector, or focusing specifically just on, education as a partner, for example. And so one of the, I'll say two brief examples. One is a program called the Flint Public Art Project, which has painted over 100 murals in the Flint community. And that program is really based on neighborhood placemaking, neighborhood pride, civic engagement. The mural is an output, but it is not really the overarching theme. And so the number of ways in which that group collaborates across the community is what makes it appealing, beyond, the visuals that it's created in blighted areas and business districts throughout the community. And then on a larger scale, one project that our foundation was involved in and involved a lot of public-private partnerships was the renovation of the Capitol Theater in downtown Flint, which was a economic development strategy because it was one of the last sort of remaining beacons in the downtown area that had not been redeveloped in well over 30 years. And so there was a lot of opportunity with that space to also ensure that there'd be spaces for community usage. A previous director of the Capitol Theater had called it, sort of the community's living room. And so, they'll have, very inexpensive movies that families can go and see. And that would not have happened without significant public and private investments. I should have mentioned this when I talked about my lens, we are the largest funder in our community. Flint is only 80,000 people, and we can sometimes give up to $70 million in our hometown. So we have to be really thoughtful about, when we're talking about collaborations, what our role is, and not taking up too much space in the room or driving the conversation. And then on the other hand, when I talk about a project like the Capitol Theater, we're going to be a significant investor in some of those larger scale projects and need to have an understanding of, what other partners can come to the table, but knowing where where we can also leverage the resources that we have to bear on a project.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in on this?
I might just say, and I said a bit about the Michigan Justice Fund, but, as I think about the cross-sector question, Kristal, and the organization of this conversation, it's, you have to ask the question, to what end? And I would just offer from where I'm sitting, I think that across sort of the issue areas, there's this issue of siloing and lack of collaboration. And the reverse of that is about effectiveness. It's about impact, and it can be about power building. And just to give a concrete example, for the Justice Fund, there's so many different pieces to this, but I guess I'll say two things. One is, as we're trying to advance justice policy, there are the advocates that live and breathe this all the time, and direct service providers. And this is, elemental, but it's worth just acknowledging the opportunity to engage folks that are actually directly proximate. And I'm just saying from the organizational perspective, a lot of times that's not happening with the policy advocates. And so the sort of feedback loop that folks need is incredibly important. The power piece is that, at least in our state, to have folks in these lanes and spaces becoming part of the larger voice as they reflect their communities, that's incredibly important too. And then I'd say the other piece around our work and all work around social change is the movement building. And the art piece there, I mean, we've been trying to be very attuned, just from observing life, the powerful way that artists, the maker of, the production of culture, advances narrative change in a way that, an op-ed in the local paper around the issues that we care about doesn't always do. And so it's been pretty exciting. I mean, I have, in some ways, two exciting jobs. One, the foundation where I sit, because we are place-based and we're small. So we're able to, the linkages, we don't have program officers working on just one thing. I mean, they really get to kind of lean into those potential linkages. But on the Michigan Justice Fund, which is, has articulated an end game around change, being very intentional about working, across these silos and bringing people together.
Yeah. Thank you for illuminating the silo issue, because that is huge. Lane, did you want to share anything?
I did. Thanks. And I just wanted to sort of plus one Melanka's points there, especially about movement building, effectiveness, impact, power building. I wrote that down. What gets me excited, and I'm happy to share an example of this, is efforts on the one hand to embed creative strategy and creatives in social justice movement work, and which is the work of all of our program areas at Ford, and organizing, mobilizing artists and creatives in the arts portfolio in that work. As a broad point, all of the programs at Ford are focused on narrative change in some way or another, recognizing how entrenched cultural narratives perpetuate inequality, from climate change to racial and reproductive justice. Where I've been focused is at the intersections of civic engagement, gender, ethnic, and racial justice, and disability arts portfolios. An example of a project I'm excited about, it's Reclaiming the Border Narrative. It was made possible by cross-cutting funds at Ford and engaged our immigrant rights and cities and states and creativity and free expression teams and grantees in each of those areas. Our partners were Borealis Philanthropy, Center for Cultural Power, National Association of Latinos Arts and Cultures, and National Association of Hispanic Journalists, we launched this effort to shape national attention on migration and the border by supporting authentic storytelling from affected communities, stories of dignity and truth. We're playing the long game here, working to shift the narrative context in which movement groups can combat xenophobic and harmful policies. The project includes, on the one hand, grant making to immigrant rights groups, and on the other hand, re-granting to creatives, technical assistance in the form of training both groups, communications, convening, and an archive at the University of Arizona. It's in its early stages, but for me, the goal, the long-term goal, is building into the DNA of the social justice movement groups, the immigrant rights groups, into their DNA, creative strategy. And this could be a model that we could apply to other categories, which is why it gets me so excited.
Yeah, it's great to hear about this project and all of the projects that you all have talked about. And with that, you know, they're large in scale, and so there's a lot of interests involved. And so I'm interested in talking about accountability, power dynamics, and trust. And at the heart of it, these partnerships are comprised of individuals and humans working towards hopefully sustainable solutions. And I imagine, especially others looking in, might think that the representatives from the philanthropic sector are, you know, sort of purse holders, and may be opposed on the opposing end of the communities most affected by these issue areas. So, what are some mechanisms or frameworks you've observed that have proved useful in establishing that culture based, again, in trust and in holding each other accountable?
So I'm happy to jump in there, and it really relates to the work that I talked about in terms of our participatory grant making. Well, there are a couple of pieces to that. One is we do a quality of life survey every year. It started as part of this Focus on Flint initiative that included participatory grant making. And so each year we ask quality of life questions to a representative sample of residents of Flint. And one of those areas is arts and culture. And while that area in particular ranked highest among all of our quality of life indicators, it was 3.6 out of 5. We wondered, why wasn't it 5 and what's missing? And, you know, there was a lot of feedback around accessibility and ensuring that the arts don't live just in, you know, some of our largest institutions, but get out into the neighborhoods, and some of our grant making to smaller arts organizations, which could be anywhere with organizations with budgets of, you know, 50,000 to about 150,000. That has increased as we've thought about, you know, that feedback. So it's a direct input, but we also, when we created the first Focus on Flint report in 2019, then we also went out and we worked with, we called them sort of hosts, community leaders, not the executive directors of every organization, but people who are known in their neighborhood or on their block, to gather a group of 10 to 15 residents to talk to us about what are some of their highest priorities for the community, what are some of the bright spots. And then as we went through that process, that led us to letting residents vote on grants for neighborhoods and neighborhood improvements based on what we heard. And all along that way, we were sharing back to the community what we heard, what we did as a result, what we're hoping to continue to do. And there's been a constant feedback loop. And so, you know, we really wanted to hold ourselves accountable for putting some resources into what we heard, but then making sure the community then could draw that direct line from what we heard. And so we've done this once, and we're hoping to do something similar again in the future. So that's one, you know, specific example that we have.
Yeah, that feedback loop, which Melinka, you talked about earlier as well. Is there anything you wanted to share on this?
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate Jennifer's just the participatory grant making. I just think that's an exciting space to be in, and certainly, I guess what I'd share is, and we are really have moved into that space. COVID in some ways offered an opportunity as we kind of came off with my Hudson-Webber hat on, here's our 3 goals. Do you fit in our boxes? COVID really, with our board and with the staff, I think opened us up, the silver lining, but what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
Here's cash. And you decide neighborhood by neighborhood where it goes, just as Jennifer's saying. I'd say for the Michigan Justice Fund, it's worth noting that we spent 7 months before launching the fund. We didn't just come together as funders to devise the strategy. We actually had 26 organizations at the table with us. We gave them grants to sit at the table, and we co-created a strategy for the fund. Mm-hmm. And that felt really vital and important. And now we have these goals and sort of, what we're trying to attack towards as a co-created process. And even for our governance structure, we have a steering committee that includes what we call now partner advisors, not 26, that's unwieldy. But in addition to the 14 funders, 9 partner advisors that sit with us, set strategy.
Yeah. Having the right amount of people at the table is also something I'm sure we're all learning as we're trying these new strategies. I am also interested in just thinking about individual agency. So as you're sitting at this table, you're representing, usually an institution or some greater something beyond yourself. But what do you as an individual also bring to that table? And so I imagine there's some attributes that are really important, a sense of humility, a sense of course, a collaborative nature. Non-competitive nature needs to be important here too. Some fearlessness. These are big issues that, precede any of us even existing. And yet we're trying to work to make a big change. So how does that resonate with you? What are some of your thoughts on this?
I'm happy to jump in here and offer what I see in effective leaders. I think I'm a work in formation for sure. But when it comes to this kind of work, I think the personality type is an organizer. And so I did some digging in labor organizing literature to see what good qualities might be. So these are labor notes, worker solidarity movement. Organizers functionally bring people together and organize them. They have the trust and respect of people they organize. Mm-hmm. To have that, they're honest, they're responsible, they are compassionate, they listen, they learn, they're prepared to learn and grow and be held accountable. They communicate, they are motivated by justice and put the interests of the group first. They are cool under pressure, which is something that I am definitely working on. And they know how to delegate. Just some thoughts there.
Yeah, cool under pressure. Melanka, as a CEO, as a board chair, cool under pressure. Would you agree?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's a great list, Lane. And it's tough to even, it's like, yeah, that. I do think, I think that and it was in there, the collaboration piece is important. I think for philanthropy, to move into a space of co-production with our partners, and I talked about this, but even with each other, can be liberating in some ways and more productive, because you're not trying to, I just feel like and I know at some point, stop talking about the Michigan Justice Fund. I'm like, we can
No,
sort of get
don't stop
away from
talking
our
about it.
individual brand of our foundations. And frankly, part of the being fearless and bold, I will say this from a, and I hope this doesn't take us in a different direction because you said talk personal, but I will say institutionally, we come with the institutional boards that we have as a place-based funder. I have an amazing board, really behind the strategies that we're executing. But I have noticed, just compared to a national and a local board, everything we do, our board is directly implicated. That, you know, if someone we're funding is making a, you know, and this is literally true, like suing the county, protesting in front of the sheriff. I mean, every board member, because we have very much a board that is tied into the establishment of our city, it feels different, I'd say. And I say this because I'm not at a national foundation, but I have felt that it has been an advantage to us as a local foundation to link hands with partners, national and local. And the Ford Foundation, I want to recognize as one of our partners, so that we can do things in a bolder way because others are doing it with us and it's not just us on the hook. So that's another way to look at it.
Yep.
Just being candid. But I took this in a different direction.
No, I like that direction. Yeah. Jennifer, go ahead.
No, I was going to piggyback on that because my previous role running the capacity building initiative that I ran was a collaboration of the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, the Ruth Mott Foundation, our local United Way and local community foundation to create a capacity building program and to advise it together. And it's interesting because now today, this is 15 plus years later, those four foundations continue to meet very regularly. I mean, the heads of those organizations through the pandemic, I think, have met every week or every other week to be responsive to the local community needs. But that I think part of what I've seen in that over the last 15 years is that it enhances the ability for others to collaborate as well, because in some cases, those four funders have are better able to articulate their role in various efforts and collaborations and who might be able to bring more resources to bear in a particular initiative. But also it's modeling, right? It's a modeling that behavior. And it also, some of the same challenges occur within those collaborative in terms of different agendas. I saw a question in the chat about, having different agendas or having, different perspectives. While we are place-based, a lot of us still bring a national or international lens because of what our other colleagues do, where all three of those other funders are hyper local all the time. So, I think that the collaboration is not just what we're expecting of grantees. They can see and they hear that we're doing it ourselves too. And same to your point, Melinka, that we walk around the grocery store in our community. So something's happening out there that people don't agree with or disagree with, and whether it's a board member or a partner or something like that, we're accountable, and we have to be able to. Honesty was a thing that came up when Lane was talking to, and I think is so important, all of this. And having been on the other side as a grantee, I think one of the biggest challenges as a grantee is if you're working with partners who are not honest, and that really can get in the way of collaboration and good collaboration.
Yeah, you're hitting on so many of the questions that we've received in the chat. So I do want to give voice to some of our audience members here and just put them out here as an option for us to talk about. So one of the first questions we got was, what are your thoughts on how foundations can fund/encourage effective collaborations that are authentic and not prescriptive for grantee organizations? So I think it's related to this accountability piece that we've been bringing up.
Yeah, I'll jump in there around the accountability piece. And maybe the same example that I gave around the Border Narrative Project, aware that it is a project that was seeded and initially conceived by a group of funders. Piggybacking on the point that this is an exciting moment to be talking about participatory budgeting, I think with all of the work, we need to be thinking about how we center the communities most impacted by the work. And so with this specific project, the work has been to resource border leaders and have them engaged at every level of the project. The design, implementation, and the pre-grant phase, when we organized working groups, when we listened. We've established an advisory body of all of our partners, of course, our re-grant partners, National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures and National Association of Hispanic Journalists, have deep ties to communities and are making the calls on where those funds go. We've also built in to this work a partnership with Southwest Folklife Alliance, which is serving as ethnographer in residence in this project. So we have a constant feedback loop on the work. The goal in part is to help all of the partners learn along the way and to share, but also rather than a sort of evaluation that you get at the end of a project to see what you've done, an evaluation that is happening in not only in an ongoing way, but in a way that's shared out, so that we're sharing publicly and our learning and can be accountable to a wider community. Just some thoughts there, working closely with your beneficiaries.
Yeah.
As a funder.
If there are no other thoughts on that one, another great question that came up was, have any of the panelists witnessed or been a part of an effective cross-sector collaborations with groups that started out with varying agendas that at times might have been cross purposes? How were they, but eventually they were able to come together? So this person is wanting to hear the success story of, it was difficult at first, but we got there. Do you have any examples of that?
I mean, I will say I feel like all of the tables that I'm at, that's actually what it is.
Yeah.
I've actually never entered into a table where that wasn't the case. And I do think this is philanthropy, one of the useful things that we can do. And I mean, this has come up, but certainly that neutral table is an important one. And I know for me, I mentioned I have a policy background. I had a varied career and was in government. Actually, I was in the Obama administration before coming into philanthropy. But I don't think I fully appreciated that part. Like that took some learning to do to understand how to hold the space. And to the earlier question, not to be prescriptive about that space, but to allow for that room. And also, you can't, there are, and again, I'll go to the justice example, but, we have tables where there's abolitionists around policing, for example, and reformers. And you can't tell me that there's not some Venn diagram where we can push forward, but we don't have to convince each different group that the other is right. I think there's space for that. And it is philanthropy is particularly well situated to come in with sort of helping folks without being prescriptive, but focus on what the sort of go forward can be.
Yeah, I think it's so important you just mentioning, like, it's not about, we're trying to come to a collaborative solution, not necessarily change, your mind about something, but come to a place that midpoint, that meeting point, which I think is really, really key here. And I'm wondering, Jennifer, if you've had anything like this in your work.
Yeah, well, I agree with the fact that almost every time people come to the table, they have differing agendas. Some maybe are more driving towards the same outcome than others. But I also agree with Melinka, is you can't you can't force the collaboration if there aren't some seeds there to build on. People aren't at the table willingly. And again, I think in having specifically worked in Flint, there are so many examples I can give from the water crisis through the pandemic of how sometimes meaningless those agendas feel when you're hit with a crisis and you're forced to work differently with others than you have before, and really look at each other and say, you do this really, really well, and so I'm getting out of that, and you're doing that. And I think a good example of that in both cases, related to responsive grant making in the water crisis, where all this money started flooding into Flint, and the United Way and the Community Foundation sort of got together, and the Community Foundation said, okay, we're going to be sort of the long-term funders for the next 20 years for those who are impacted, but the United Way is going to take that, immediate money that's available to help respond to this crisis. And those were based on, leaders putting egos aside and, not worrying about what it meant to their asset base, but instead thinking about what's most important for the community. And a similar thing happened around something called the Greater Flint Urgent Relief Fund for the pandemic. And so, but again, a lot of that came down to having built honest, trusting relationships with each other, and knowing that there's always going to be some differing perspectives and agendas based on their own organizational priorities. But it really comes down to where do you want there to be an impact, and where do you want to be immediately, in these cases, immediately responsive. And so I think that has carried over into other parts of the community in ways that, for example, during the pandemic, the arts organizations came together to be creative about how to reach new audiences or get out into the neighborhoods in safe ways, and partnering with medical facilities in ways they never did. We had one organization, doing concerts in the hospital parking lots for frontline workers as a way to both keep their musicians fine-tuned and provide a service to frontline workers. So, those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about the institutions, that we're representing, and I guess folks want to know if there are others, who you're looking to as leading figures in this arena. And I appreciate you, Jennifer, just talking about how the arts sector stepped up during the COVID-19 pandemic. And prior to this, I worked in opera, and I remember there were some opera company costume designers making PPE, and that was incredible. It was an incredible moment, using their spaces for testing and et cetera. So have there been specific institutions or folks, leaders in this arena that you've been looking to for guidance and ideas?
I'm happy to jump in here, and I'm just reflecting back on what Melinka and Jennifer have shared about the opportunity that philanthropy presents to convene, bring people together, encourage collaboration, and also being aware that when we as funders do that, we run the risk of being prescriptive, and of the groups at the table not sharing with us the real differences that they have. So as much as I see opportunity there, I'm excited about those spaces where we can listen and support collaborations that are already sort of emerging in the space. And there's a couple that have been very exciting for me in the movement building space. A project called Culture Surge, which really sits at the intersection of narrative change and civic engagement, and was focused on mobilizing artists around the vote, right to vote, this past year, and Center for Cultural Power, which is a grantee in the Creativity and Free Expression Unit, partnered with Illuminative, the League, and Harness. These are grantees in actually 4 different program areas at Ford that came together to create as Melinka said before, efficiency, impact, power building, recognizing that by sharing their audiences and their communications infrastructure, they could achieve more as movement organizations, more than the sum of their parts by coming together. And I see all kinds of opportunity like that. There's also in the national ASO space, Art Service Organization space, there's a group called Intercultural Leadership Institute, where Alternate Roots, First Peoples Fund, Pai Foundation, I'm forgetting a couple of others, but national organizations that are created, led by, and serving communities of color have come together to think about what they can do together. And that includes a fellowship program, scanning, research, sharing knowledge and learning around regranting. And I see this sort of coming together with urgency as another something that's been happening over time, but that's been accelerated by the pandemic, and another silver lining, if we're allowed to use that word. And I'm just hopeful that these collaborations stick.
Yeah. What's interesting is that we have been talking about organizations in which this movement work is already a part of their mission. But we received a really interesting question in the chat, which was, what would you say to orchestra leaders or board members who may see doing this kind of work outside the sector as mission creep? What are your thoughts on that? So any more traditional arts organization wanting to get involved with this and convincing the board that it's not mission creep?
Yeah. Well, let me jump in and just say, what's also interesting just from an individual artist perspective too, I didn't share just a personal piece that I'm the daughter of an artist who was very, his art as a Black person painting, that was the political project, but like the content of the art was the art, and fascinating conversations. Like he would be like, let me just paint, right? So that is a whole nother conversation, but I did want to say that I saw that question and I see the challenge, but I think that Lane's earlier comment actually opens the door. I mean, there are, and maybe we should go back to Lane because he's obviously expert, but these intermediary organizations and these art service organizations that are holding some of that capacity. So, your organization is a member in some of these groups and they're doing some, forward action on behalf of their members and have the credibility, is one way just to think about how to be in this space. But maybe Lane, you could, if you agree with that, talk about, there are many players in the ecosystem. I do think though that again, while understanding that challenge, I think that all of us in whatever sector we're in, it does feel like we're at this moment with the pandemic, with the assault on our democracy, with all that's had climate change. And I don't know, I had someone say to me, this moment feels like if we are not going to wake up and wherever we're sitting and whatever we're doing and kind of have a step into it and meet this moment in our leadership from wherever we sit, then we are in trouble. So I do want to say that too.
I would agree with everything that Melinka just said. There's this question about mission creep. I think that it is a question that should be asked, and the work that should be done is work that can enhance a mission and not take away from mission. So I think it's really reflecting on what you're doing, why you're doing it, what's the intent, as Melinka encouraged us to think about, early on. How is the work relevant? To whom is the work relevant? And how can it be amplified? And I think when you start to ask those questions, you can see how engaging cross-sector forces can be an amplifier and not a detractor.
Yeah. So folks, given, this great opportunity to speak to four funders, have been really interested in the grant making philanthropy process. And so there are two related questions here. One is, are there ways that your grant making institution is creating flexibility for nonprofit organizations to do the work? And they mentioned, hey, general operating funding with less strings. So in this moment, perhaps you were doing this before, but have there been changes that have arisen recently to make the grant making process more flexible to allow folks to do the work?
Yeah, I would say for us, so the example I gave earlier of our participatory grant making process, we did something a little bit different because residents voted, and then we reached out to, because Flint is a small community, we reached out to the sort of limited pool of organizations that did that work and really streamlined the grant making process, since we were looking to them to build upon what residents had voted on. So that's another way. But I'm going to keep going back to this building relationships piece, because we recently had a series of conversations with some organizational leaders just to sort of check in at the beginning of the year and be thinking about our own, budgeting process, frankly, and what folks might be needing that we're not anticipating. And part of what my colleague and I were talking about going in to it is, we're going to be worried if they're presenting everything as just fine, right? Because nobody is just fine right now. And so sort of starting with that frame of, okay, we're not just fine. Here are all the things that we're sort of grappling with on our end, so that we can have an authentic conversation with them about, we know things are not peachy. And so we really want to understand what some of the things that you're struggling with and that you might need help with, so that we can be responsive as our year plays out. And so we open the door, and again, sort of sharing our own perspectives in that space too, not just leaving it up to them to have to be vulnerable in that way. And so I think that, it is easier to do it when you are place-based and you know these people and you may have known them for a really long time, and you're right on the ground, so you can see some of this stuff up close too. So, but I think it is really key.
Yeah, I think so too. And related to even what you were saying, this other question was about how can a small nonprofit that has been following this grant process be more bold, truthful, and authentic? And you already talked about, just building that relationship. But I wonder, I mean, we talked a bit about this earlier, power dynamics. Sometimes that sense of agency doesn't seem that way, especially for the smaller nonprofits. So is there any advice that we can provide?
Kristal, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand how you're framing it. You're saying for folks that want to be bold, or how can small organizations fit into access these philanthropic dollars?
I think it's the first for folks who want to be involved in a funder relationship. How can they be bold and authentic? And I think someone said this earlier. Sometimes there's a lack of trust, and so folks aren't honest with because of, again, that power dynamic is at play. So is there just advice to how to negotiate that relationship and navigate that relationship?
I guess the thing that is I am resisting the sort of, this is what the grantee should do. I think that the inquiry should be focused on us, on philanthropy, and particularly as we're talking about small organizations. What can we do to make the process, in some ways, less relational driven? I'd say for my organization, we're small. We do operating support. We do that for our arts grantees. We have relationships with arts institutions in the city that go back literally 100 years. But one of the things that we did is work with an intermediary partner for Culture Source so that we could reach individual artists and small organizations, because there is no way that we can, there are three of us, including myself on the program side, we can't touch, we just can't. We can't touch meaningfully at an individual artist level, given where we sit, in a way that I think would be authentic or tap into expertise that we have. And that was another piece of using an intermediary. That said, I mean, dollars are finite too. Mm-hmm. So the end game can't just be about philanthropy. Philanthropy is not, it is an important component of support, but I also just want to deprivilege philanthropy too in some of the work, the path for sustainability, which could be around advocacy, right? More public support and dollars.
Yeah. Well, we've reached the 5-minute mark, and I want to thank everyone who submitted their questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. There were some great questions here. And I want to shift it back to just grounding us that, we've been talking to passionate artists, leaders, educators, funders, advocates, administrators. And so what do you want to leave people with? What should they leave this conversation with? It could be a resource, a thought, an idea. What do you think?
I think I'll just go back to, what I said, thinking about the mission, the vision that you have for your work, and how it might be amplified by thinking about the partners that you bring to the table to accomplish that mission. What about the current moment draws you, and what's happening in the world right now? How is your organization, your work relevant? Who's your audience? How can they be leveraged? Who are your funders? And think about amplification there.
Amplification.
And I'll pass it to my colleagues with many thanks for having me here today.
I'd just jump in and add, and I'm because we were talking about the cross-sector piece, I just want to underscore what Lane is saying about how that can be so powerful for an organization. I'd also say, and this is again actually underscoring this piece that, because we are funders here, I do think the most powerful presentation is not trying to, and if you're working with the right funder, let me acknowledge, not trying to channel where the funder is coming from, but authentically showing the relevance to your community, because that's what matters most. And that's what you should be getting funders to get behind, not how you fit into their box.
I say resources follow relevance.
I like that.
No, I think that is so true. And again, I want to echo my thanks to, I have always been a big fan. We fund the Sphinx Overture program, which I didn't use as my highlight of collaboration, because Sphinx Overture operates in all of the elementary schools in the public elementary schools in Flint, and continues to expand to other schools. And that has been an incredible collaboration, and not always easy. For sure. So I want to echo, collaboration is a very impactful tool to have impact on a community and issue area, but it's not easy, and it requires a lot of risk at times. Sometimes, a lot of humility, and being honest about, what you bring to the table and what you need to step back from. And so that can be difficult at times. But again, the successful collaborations we see end up benefiting, the community that you're trying to serve, or the work that you're trying to get out into the world. And so I think it's an incredibly important topic. I'm so grateful to Kristal for pulling this group together. And earlier I didn't get to say, but one of the places that I look to learn is the Ford Foundation, particularly around participatory grant making. That's how your colleague Chris over there has pulled me into this space. And so we all have things to learn about this work too.
Well, I couldn't
Thank you
have
for
said
your
it better.
partnership.
Thank you. And thank you all for your partnership and for leading us through this conversation. Thank you to everyone watching. Thank you to everyone at Sphinx for making sure that this ran smoothly. May we continue to lift each other up and work together to create something new and wonderful. So thank you.